our branding about Vietnam, Vietnamese culture, all of that is at the heart of how we change people's minds and perceptions. Changing that branding takes all of us to work together to understand, relates to your question now, what it means to be Vietnamese, right? I'm Phuong Steinhauer. I'm the co-founder and executive director of Vietnam Society. We are a premier private nonprofit organization dedicated to celebrating the dynamic arts and culture of Vietnam.
Welcome to The Vietnamese. I'm your host, Kenneth Nguyen. Being part of a culture of nearly 100 million Vietnamese people in the world today comes with a lot of pain, proud history, and privilege. Join me as I highlight and explore the Vietnamese experience from all over. Thank you for coming on, Erin. I know you're super busy with the events coming up in the next week. As I've been preparing for so many events this year to speak at, to be involved with, I asked myself, and I'm asking you today, what do you think drives you to keep pushing the culture? What draws you to the culture? What makes you so pumped about promoting our culture?
First, thank you so much, Ken, for having me on your show. I've been a huge fan for so long, and just listening to all the talents and all the amazing people on your show inspires me so much. And that is part of our culture, part of our people. Our culture spans 4,000 years. We're the third oldest country in the world, a fact that not many people know. It's one that allows me to wake up and just to feel proud of who we are. And what drives me is when I see more and more these days of young people, young Vietnamese Americans who really don't know that, who really don't have that seed of inspiration, of love for Vietnam and for the culture. I have been so privileged to experience it when I was a child, living in Vietnam until age 9 when I came to the U.S. And then going back as an adult, living and working there, that I feel that it's it enriches me. It makes me so much stronger when I'm in touch with my culture and my identity. And when I see people around me not understanding that, I want to help them. And so that's part of the reason why we started Vietnam Society. The second reason is living here in America and seeing how people have no idea who we are. We're kind of blended into this kind of weird tapestry of, and of Asian-esque cultures that even that's misunderstood. And it pains me to see the negativities that are in the mindset of so many Americans, just American public in general. When they think of Vietnam, they see a war-torn country. They see poor people wearing raggedy clothes and conical hats, stooped over rice fields. They see a strange group of people who really don't belong. And so, of course, that has changed a bit over time since we've been here for 50 years. But the perception of Vietnam as a place of war and of the misunderstanding of us and who we are still remains in their minds. So Vietnam Society aims to change that, both the perception of the American public as well as the hearts of young generations, to inculcate the love of Vietnam into their hearts.
As we were growing up, you and I probably in the same generation, we were noticing, there's these very uncomfortable situations, sort of like in the cafeteria in high school, or as we journeyed along, the workplace, there's all of these sort of inconsistencies with who we were and who, mainstream society is. But as our children, who are probably in their teens now, are growing up, Vietnamese, they don't really kind of have that pushback that we have. So I think my question is, would retaining the Vietnamese culture for them be important today? And that's a question I ask myself constantly. It's like, this is important for me and you and our generation and the people who are first generation. It's important that we feel a certain way when we're around mainstream society. But I think about my kids and your kids, and why would this be important when they're living a comfortable life and they probably are not experiencing what we experienced?
It's a great question, and one that you wonder, are they okay? Are they just okay the way they are? Why complicate their lives?
Yes, why complicate their lives?
Which oftentimes you feel like you're actually dragging them along
Yes.
to Vietnamese diasporic events, and you feel like you're just being a nuisance to them at times. um, I believe that they are that way because they are cut off from the past. They feel cut off from the past, but they don't know it. They feel confused, but they don't know it. You just know what you know, right? And when you lose a part of culture, it's like losing a part of yourself. And in our work with at Vietnam Society, we see young people who are in their late teens, in college, or in their 20s. At some point, they do ask, who am I? At some point, they do want to know, there's a part of me that I want to explore, want to be a part of, want to be in touch with, but I don't really know what that is. And when that time comes, they are seeking, right? And so what's important for them at that point in time, and we want to reach them when they're ready. It's not let's force it down their throats whenever we think they need to do that. But when someone is in touch with their own identity, and it could be dual identity or three parts of them, that's, Vietnamese. I have great grand no, not great, grand nieces and nephews who are Romanian, Ethiopian, Vietnamese, and something else. I don't know. So, but there are like 3-4 different cultures within themselves. That when that happens to them, and they grow up and they wonder who they are, and when they acknowledge the richness of who they are, they become stronger as people. And being in touch with the Vietnamese part of their identity makes them so much stronger as an individual. If we're only talking about Vietnamese and American, because now they not only have a 200 something years old culture in them that's American, but a 4,000-year culture that is deep in values, with resilience, with just so much that is ingrained in us that helps them to just charter through life in a way that is so much more powerful.
Thank you for clarifying my mission.
Because
I come to the table sometimes and I'm like, I'm interested in this stuff. I love this subject so much, and I do it a lot for myself. But sometimes I wonder, what kind of effect are we really leaving for the second generation? And is there another way to reframe it? Because maybe perhaps the way we look at things are a little bit for ourselves, and maybe perhaps that the mission of our work could be passed on in a different way, but you've illuminated very well and you've articulated really well why passing on culture at this level is very, very important.
Thank you. Thank you. It took me a while to think through that. But, Ken, it's also about us. We're the 1.5 generation, and even the tapestry of our culture fades through time.
Right.
50 years. I've been here for more than 40 years. And, and like I said at the beginning, I was fortunate to go back to Vietnam. I lived there for 3 years in my adult life, and back and forth to work, and I was able to be in touch with it. I do know many people, my cousins, etc., even my own siblings who have not come back so often. We're kind of like, as a diaspora, wanderers in a foreign land. Depending on when you came over here, the time that you arrived here is frozen in time when you kind of know about your culture, know about your heritage and your history. So from that moment on, and the war really severed families. We have to know that is the consequence of the war for us, that it forced us to leave, right? And it severed families. And so we've been wanderers in a foreign land, just adrift, right? Without an anchor of our cultural roots, unless we really are out there, proactively reconnecting with our cultural roots constantly. We're not really connected. And therefore, for people who don't live in Orange County or, some of the areas where there's strong Vietnamese communities, they really are cut off. And they, their view and their connection to their own culture fades over time. So we want that to also be a mission for you, for us, for those who are doing the kind of work we do.
You come from a big family, right? Of 12, you said?
Yes.
Now, you have traveled back and forth to Vietnam. You're doing this work within Vietnam society. How did they initially react to you living in Vietnam? And how do they feel about your mission and your work today, as people who are, it seems like a big range of siblings in age. So I'm sure that there's so much sort of sentiment about your involvement in Vietnam and your involvement here in the community. How do they feel?
It's a great question. So I have 12. There are 12 in our family, 6 boys and 6 girls. My father stayed in Vietnam. He was in the trại cải tạo or re-educational camp. And so my mother, single mom, 12 kids in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, which is Amish town. For those who don't know where that is, it's really, it was really a tough transition for us, basically from riches to rags, kind of the opposite of what we experience in the U.S. Therefore, we all had to work together. The Vietnamese values of family and community and supporting and helping each other was ingrained in us from a young age because we had to. But also, our mother was very much one of those extremely traditional moms who just taught by proverbs, all those Vietnamese proverbs, which, like 40 years later, I still remember them. I mean, it's just like in my brains. Một cây làm chẳng nên non, ba cây chụm lại nên non núi cao, nên hòn núi cao. Means you work together and you can't build even a small hill, but the 3 of you working together, you can build a mountain. And so with Vietnam in our hearts from a young age, with mom just ingraining that in us, even though there there were questions or my siblings wondering what I'm doing, I think the confusion for them was not necessarily why are you doing this, but why did you quit your job? Why did you throw everything away, and why are you doing this day in and day out, and day and night, and why are you so passionate? I think that to them was more of the central question than, is this the right thing to do? So as a result, they actually have been extremely helpful. They shop their things and they help wherever they can.
Wow.
To build Vietnam society from scratch required a village. And so my brothers, my sisters, my children, my cousins, just everybody giving whatever they can. And through that, we actually were able to get others in the community to help, because they see that it's, that it's Vietnam society is an effort by everybody. It's not, the co-founders or these people who are, leading everything, but it is really an effort, as demonstrated by this family that just, do it with their heart.
What?
I'm sorry, but I do want to say there was there are in the older generations some people who quietly disapprove. They really don't want anything to do with Vietnam, and they would, my uncle in particular came to visit from Michigan, and he just sat there shaking his head and
Wow.
said a few things, and we're like, I'm sorry, but this is the right thing to do, and this is something that we feel very strongly about.
What is his opposition?
He's still against the current government, the bitterness of war, the pains of loss, the trauma that he endured is still in his head, in his heart. And the thing is, we respect that. Everybody grieve in their own ways, and we know that trauma exists deep within the hearts of many, many Vietnamese living overseas today.
The ones that I have noticed that will not let it go are typically the ones that had a lot to lose. And I don't mean material possessions. I think there is this sort of hope and dreams of their trajectory, where they were heading in the future, that was taken from them. And many times the ones that were locked up have more forgiveness than the ones that didn't get locked up. It's so weird, because I have uncles and in that world that were locked up that don't have and harbor those kind of emotions, but it's the ones that left a little bit earlier sometimes that had all these dreams of, their lives were heading in a certain career trajectory, or they were imagining that they were going to accrue some levy, some position, some political power, that they're so kamfang, they're just so angry about losing it. So I think it exists in all sorts of shapes, and many times we just can't really sit there and fight it, because we can't get into their minds to understand and correct any of this. Is, I think, the best thing to do, just like what I experienced in debating politics, is just sitting and listening and understanding what they're going through, and just nodding and not really debating it, and just absorbing what they think and feel. And many times the love that they give back as a result of just listening is the way forward, is the way I see it sometimes. I mean, that's how I see it right now.
Yeah, it's that is so true. That is so true what you say. It's such a complicated history, it's such a complicated situation that our diaspora is in. Uh, I have been reading and following a lot about U.S. Vietnam reconciliation efforts, which is called War Legacy, addressing war legacies or consequences of war. A lot of that deals with the things that America has done to Vietnam, whether it's the bombing and how that damaged our land and hurt our people, the Ancient Orange issue, how dioxin is still in our earth and how it's really still damaging and killing people. And then all of the things that have been done with the mines that are still there. There's still like 1 million unexploded ordinances all around Vietnam. So it's really about that. But then I constantly bring in the fact that trauma to the Vietnamese people is a huge consequence of war. Trauma that is intergenerational from the people we were just talking about to the first generation who deal with that trauma in their own ways, which transfer down into younger generations as well. The reconciliation among Vietnamese is one of the most challenging sort of aftermath of the war. So much more than U.S.-Vietnam bilateral relations.
100% agree with that.
And for us, part of the reason is the people that you just spoke of, the people and then the other people I just shared, have not had a platform, a way to actually talk about it, to actually, just to admit we have PTSD from the war, that we ourselves have so much pent up issues in our hearts, and so much trauma that still exists that we haven't even gotten to that first phase yet. And as you say, part of dealing with this requires acknowledgement of what happened in the past, acknowledgement of the pains and the sufferings and the loss, as you said, has happened. And then just having a dialogue that promotes trust, that promotes just reconnection, that even, and I don't want to use, there are certain words that, trigger people, like, I need you to apologize to me, for me to, be better, right? To get better, etc. But that trauma still exists in our community, and Vietnam society is built upon the fact that culture is the soft power, and it is an incredible medium for addressing trauma. There are hundreds of stories around the world or case studies where art and culture is used to help communities that have been affected by war, like real crazy sufferings from war, to heal. And so we're not experts in this area, but we believe that when we provide opportunities for people to reconnect with their roots through this medium of art and culture, we are in fact also helping to address that part of themselves that needs to be healed.
How did you come up with the idea to start Vietnam Society? And the second part is, what happens during the week of the celebration or the events that you put on?
Vietnam Society came about as a young person living in Washington, D.C. I attended many types of events from other countries. Like Japan Society has, for the last 100 years, put on incredible events. more recently Korea society and other Asia society, other countries, just showcasing the beauty and magnificence of their countries. And when I was in my 20s, I just thought, wow, this is really great. I get to, enjoy all of these things. But then there was a moment in time where I questioned, why isn't Vietnam and our people and Vietnamese art and culture presented here in Washington, D.C., where, of course, this is the nation's capital. So you'd see, just a kaleidoscope and, the United Nations being flaunted here all the time. And that was when I think in my heart, I felt we needed representation for Vietnam. So I actually started to do this work 30 years ago. There was an exhibition that took place in, I think, 1997, when U.S.-Vietnam normalized diplomatic relations. And I went to a fine art exhibition that started at the Meridian House, and it's a beautiful mansion for diplomats. And I looked at all of these amazing fine art that came out of Vietnam at that time, the art masters. And by the way, that's where I was exposed to my husband's photograph, and that's how we actually later met. But that's a different story.
That's a different podcast.
And that's kind of when I just said, why aren't we promoting and showing more of this amazing art? And anyone who's gone to Vietnam would know how beautiful our paintings and our art are. Not just, art from 1,000 years ago, but contemporary Vietnamese fine art is magnificent. And so I actually organized my own exhibition. Soon after that, I was a lobbyist at the time, and I contacted at that time Senator Chuck Hagel, who became Secretary of Defense later on. And I said, Senator Hagel, since you've been to Vietnam, would you please sponsor an exhibition at the U.S. Senate of photographs of Vietnam? And he agreed, which was just so amazing. So we had an exhibition inside the Russell Senate building, right on Capitol Hill. We invited the Vietnamese community, we invited the general public, and just everybody showed up, like filled the Senate, and the senator gave a speech, and and none of the photographs were of the war. All the photographs were, and they're actually now my husband's photographs. There was an exhibition of his, black and white, portraying portraits and landscapes of people, portraits of people and landscapes all over Vietnam. And the Vietnamese community, published the exhibition in a 4-page newspaper article just about that. And that was the time when I said, this is the right thing. And that was the moment when I said, Vietnam society needs to be born. Of course, it took, 20 years to build Vietnam society. But that was the start of it.
What an incredible story. I thought you just woke up 3 years ago and said, I want to do this. But these sort of journeys, when we look back, they go back decades. They're planted and rooted decades before they ever happened.
Yes.
Now, absolutely. There are similar models like you just mentioned, Japan Society. Can you tell me a little bit about what these societies actually do?
Sure. So I talk about Japan Society because it's really it's really a great model for us to consider. During World War II, as you can imagine, the perception of the Japanese government and Japanese people in America was extremely negative and distressful. The Japanese internment was a horrible time in American history, where Japanese Americans were taken from their homes and interned for 5 years. It was just so incredible that actually happened in this country. After the war, the Japanese government itself, and of course Japan was seen to be the enemy, it's just the horrible people. Japan then embarked upon this campaign to change that perception of who they are. And that's when Japan Society was born. And they just did everything they could to portray Japan to be a loving, peaceful, beautiful country with cultures that are, the best in the world, and best food, best clothes, best music, everything, to just slowly change the mindset. And they are successful, because today we think of Japan as Zen gardens, yes, high quality anime that has reached the mainstream America with Studio Ghibli, and I mean, like, I can go on and on and on, because my own children watch all of this stuff, and we consume everything Japanese. And that is the hard work of Japan Society that took place 100 years ago.
Yes, and that was the answer I was looking for. This promotion of a culture that is not being perceived well is what Vietnam Society, Japan Society, these societies, that's what the core mission of bringing a brighter light onto the culture of the Vietnamese.
Yes. And it is something that we have to take pride in. It brings a bright light into who we are, changing that perception. But we know that our potential is 100 folds of where we are today. We just know that, right now we're seen as a group of people who are almost, if they think of Vietnam in general, rice farmers, and of the people who many Americans are still scared going to Vietnam. Am I going, or, do people hate me, etc.? And with Vietnamese Americans here, the general public might think, okay, well, they're kind of Asian, maybe they're Chinese, maybe they're Japanese, I think that we need to shine a very bright light on who we are, not just for ourselves, going back to the younger generation, and then reconnecting with roots, etc. Selves, our people, our community, and our country.
Now, how is Vietnam Society, the week and the gala? Can you tell me how all of that's organized, and what kind of events are we looking at?
Sure. So Vietnam Society, we operate not just on just the week. So there is Vietnam Week, which is our marquee annual event that takes place during Tết Trung Thu week, so Mid-Autumn Festival week. But we actually do events throughout the year. The way that we work is we have events, and then we have projects. And our strategy is to present the best of Vietnamese art and culture, wherever that comes from the US, as represented by people like Kevin Tien, who's one of our best chefs in America, or from Vietnam, as represented by people like Anh Trần, who is a jazz saxophonist, who is like a budding star. She's incredible. She's only 18 and incredible. People like Linh Papin, who is a young writer who is French Vietnamese, born in Hanoi, to a Vietnamese dad and a French mother. Now, moved to France when she was 10. She's an incredible writer. Pham Thu Thu, who just won the Cannes d'Or Awards. So we represent and bring the best of the best to the table, so that on these world stages, such as the Kennedy Center or the Smithsonian, people can see that we're no longer the conical hat people in Alzai who prance around.
Yeah.
Right? So that's really our mission, to do that, our goal to do that. And then the second is we present the authenticity of our culture to the deepest detail that we can, so that we're accurate, almost like what you would do at a museum. The curators spend years researching the exact accurate thing, so that it brings trust that these people know what they're doing. When you go to a museum, that it's 99.9% correct. We spend an enormous amount of time working with people who research our history, so that when we bring something to a stage, it is historically accurate and culturally accurate, such as a 19th century wedding reenactment that we did last year at the Kennedy Center. Every detail was researched for years by scholars in Vietnam, from the tradition of the clothing, like the fabric, the even the buttons, and the way it's sewn and designed, all of that was recreated to all of those details, to the altar, to the music. Every aspect was carefully considered. And so when we brought the audience to see the reenactment, what they saw was young Vietnamese people on stage, which we spent so much time training. And they're Vietnamese Americans trained by Vietnamese experts from Saigon, who came over and trained them. Like, it was incredible. And you can imagine the language, right? So the expert didn't really speak English. So we had a second expert who was bilingual. So the two of them teaching this group of young people every step, every movement, to reenact the show.
Did you video? Do you have video of that?
We, we have some of that video. What happened was there were IP issues with the Kennedy Center. So, but we can grab some of that video for you to see.
I mean, the interesting thing would be the behind the scenes training, the getting the actors up to speed, and then the final. That would be like a 1 hour show that I would sit and easily consume.
Absolutely. I can share that with you. It was just so
mind-boggling,
heartwarming for me. It was so heartwarming, because that's how we change these young people. At the very beginning, you asked me the question, does it really matter for these young people? I saw that it mattered to them, because they posted hundreds of posts on social media during and after this whole process, where one woman said, I was born in the US. My mom forced me to kind of learn Vietnamese. I never felt Vietnamese. But then I'm a professional model, and now I'm a part of this program. Now I know what it means to be Vietnamese, and I love it so much, and please call upon me anytime you guys want to do anything. Now I'm going to volunteer just as much as you want. That's when it's really, inculcating deep into their hearts about, their pride in their own country, So the audience who came to watch were half Vietnamese, half Americans. And on the Vietnamese side, we had like 90 years old to 6 years old. We even had the scouts troop come in wearing their scouts uniforms, the Vietnamese scouts. They're so cute. And then we had Americans who were just respectful and love our culture. And they just said, they've never seen anything like this before. We had ambassadors who came from Denmark, from Indonesia, from Cambodia, Brunei. They came with their spouses. And it was just one of those things that you had to witness to really feel the power of how our art and culture can move and change people. So that's a kind of like a broad answer to your question, how do we do this? Chose Vietnam Week itself every year because there isn't anything like that in DC that allows us to have a moment in time in a year that can help people remember, oh, this is Vietnam Week, and that's also the Japanese model.
Right.
So Japan Society, what they do is they transform all of DC every spring into Japan Week. And now over time, it's become like Japan Month, the month of Japan. Wow. And even now they have, and it's so incredible, right? And you have to respect this. They've changed even the narrative to say, spring, think Japan. Spring in DC, think Japan. And that's like so catchy as a phrase, like think spring, think Japan. And so every spring when the thousands of cherry blossom trees bloom around DC, the entire city is pink. And they now have pink banners with cherry blossoms lining the streets of DC and saying, Spring Festival, Spring Japan. And
they own that. They own that space in your mind for spring in DC. They own it.
Exactly. For most Americans, to the point where, in fact, their street festival gets 4,000 or 5,000 people come over 2 days. It's like completely, they take over like 5 city blocks right down in front of the US Capitol for 2 full days of the weekend in the spring. And half of the people who volunteer, it's like 800-900 people volunteer, half of them are Americans. So you can imagine how they have mainstreamed Japan in the hearts of Americans. And so, we're starting out as they started out 20 some years ago, but we're fast tracking it. We're after the first full year, we have Americans volunteering as well, and we have Vietnamese volunteering. So we're doing it, but it's going to take us much less time than 20 plus years to be successful.
I just threw a party here in Orange County with the Vietnamese Film Festival, and we had almost about 1,000 people attend. And what I can say is, it felt like it was only 3 minutes. I didn't really get to experience the event the way a guest would. My question to you is, as an organizer, you get to sit in and participate, and you can, but you really cannot, because you're really sitting there to organize and to really pay attention to the details. What have you gotten out of this?
Oh, it's a great question, because I actually do get to enjoy, because I have such an amazing team. We have such an amazing team. They are young people who just take the rein and go and do the work because they want me to. It's not about experiencing, but it's about me being there, hosting people and speaking with people, making sure that the ambassador who comes really know and understand and can enjoy as well. So even though I'm working at the events, I'm still a part of the audience per se. I'm still sitting there enjoying the show, and what I see is just people being amazed. People really being amazed at what they see. I look at people's expressions. I love seeing that. In the wedding show, I see young people just astounded that this is Vietnam. This is how beautiful Vietnam is, and the Q&A portion of it is the part that I love the most, because that's when people really get engaged. And after the wedding show, the Q&A went so long that the Kennedy Center had to flick their lights to get us to kick us out, because it was so engaging. So we had old people, of course, as Vietnamese old people go, they'll question things like, wait, is that really accurate? Can you explain that? That when I grew up, it wasn't like that. And so our expert on stage, by the way, he spent 12 years living in China to learn about Chinese history and culture in order to understand and learn about our own history and culture, because 1,000 years of Chinese colonization of Vietnam made us so much of our culture being kind of influenced by China. And so he knows Nom fluently, he speaks Chinese fluently, and of course he has a PhD in our culture. And so he's standing on stage answering.
That's another podcast right there.
Yeah, he's standing on stage answering this, 80-year-old man's question, and I am sitting in the audience thinking, thank God it's him, up there, and not any of us.
Yeah.
To questions from a young man. He must be like 25, and he said, I understand my own family's wedding traditions and how my parents got married and what all of the little things meant. So it was a narrated reenactment. Like every movement was narrated to say, this is what's happening and this is the culture behind that. And so now I understand, and maybe I'm going to get married in the Vietnamese traditions. And so at that point, what was really funny was our English speaking expert on stage said, this man is ready to get married. Any takers here? And so many women just raised their hands because he was really handsome. It's that kind of engagement that made it so powerful for me to observe. So Vietnam Week, actually, getting back to your question about, when it happens, and I was talking about Japan owning spring. Here in DC, Japan owns spring time. China actually owns during Lunar New Year in January, and also part of summer. Korea and Hong Kong do programs in the summer. And by the way, the Koreans are so powerful now in DC in terms of, pushing their culture here, with not only product, but also investments. They're basically just
taking over,
spending so much money here, even at the museums. They would ask the museum, let's do this program together, and we'll pay all your expenses. We'll pay for everything, which is, could be millions, right? So so Vietnam society chose the fall. We strategically picked Tết Trung Thu during the fall because for some reason there's a gap in time in the calendar where the other countries don't have any kind of ownership over that. And so we said, okay, every year, fall, we're going to start changing the minds of people to say that's Vietnam Week, and they can look forward to an entire week of events, which focuses on 5 different areas of our culture. So the events focus on films. So we'll show films, and I wouldn't call it a big film festival, but just selected films that are excellent that we can show here. Like last year, we premiered Amberton in the U.S. At the Smithsonian last year. And then we do performing arts like dance and sing and music. We do a literary track. So we partner with Divan in San Francisco to put that together. So last year we had Nguyen Dynasty. This year we have Nguyen Trung, whose book was banned in several states because of the anti-Asian sentiments, and because he writes about LGBTQ themes.
Right.
So we have him, and also Lynn Papin from Paris. We have a cuisine track. So last year we had a cooking demo inside the Smithsonian by Kevin Tien. This year we have 2 cooking demos by famous, other local chefs here. We did ask a few others from other parts of the country, but they couldn't make it, unfortunately, this year. But so out of those 5 tracks, we put on different events throughout the week. This year's theme is Authentic Voices, Bridging Generations. All of the events are rooted in highlighting the foundation that our Vietnamese elders, and when I say elders, I would say, my mother's age and partially, that first generation have laid, highlighting the potential of our culture, but also, really what we stood for, and want to acknowledge that, because there were so many before all of us. But then how they're passing the torch to us and to younger generations to preserve our culture outside of our ancestral lands. So yeah, this year we've got a whole full set of events, and they're all free of charge. We really want to make this as inclusive as possible. So we encourage everybody to come if they can, to enjoy, experience, and support.
Where can our audience find more information on Vietnam Society and the celebrations that are happening?
Just on our website, vietnamsociety.org.
And then what about any social media handles?
Yeah, we're on Instagram, Vietnam Society, just that, hashtag Vietnam Society. And we're on Facebook, but from what I heard yesterday, there were some technical difficulties, so don't get on there right now, but we're on there as well.
Most people are on Instagram anyway. I feel like most people get their information about these events from Instagram.
Yes, we are fortunate to have an amazing young team who understands social media, understand promotion, led by Kimmy Vo, and Dan Jung, and our intern, Aiden Litton, a 3rd-year college student at Georgetown. Brilliant young man. But I can just share forever about our team. It's just amazing.
Well, I want to leave everybody with the final question. What does it mean to be Vietnamese to you?
Wow. I thank you for asking that final question. Well, what I actually want to say, just one more thing, if I may, before the final question, is just to say our branding is important. Our branding about Vietnam, Vietnamese culture, all of that is at the heart of how we change people's minds and perceptions. And changing that branding takes all of us to work together to understand how it, and that relates to your question now, what it means to be Vietnamese, right? We are a culture that is a tapestry woven with tradition, resilience, unwavering spirit, 4,000 years of art, of just amazing things that you can find. And I'm learning maybe even just 1% of that, because there's so much, right? But the branding of Vietnam needs to change. And for us to work together to keep finding these amazing talents and art that represents who we are. And the more that we can showcase that, the better for us to start changing that branding. And we actually also, we should form a small group of people who understand branding, right? That Japanese model of branding, it's not just, let's go and just throw together some shows. It's not just that. It's understanding, where we are and where we need to go to change that perception to where that is, that's unique about Vietnamese culture, that we want people to, keep in their minds, like Japan, sushi, Zen,
yep.
mono, anime, that kind of thing, or K-pop, and Korean barbecue, right? We're not just about pho, yeah. For those who know us, or conical hats, or those things anymore. So we engaging these young people who really understand the execution, of the branding that we put together. It's a must do as a foundational piece of work. But getting back to your question about, what I believe to be our culture and what it means to be Vietnamese is actually something that is in our hearts. Being Vietnamese is feeling it in our heart of, the land and the culture. It's sacred within us. And maybe that is passed through our DNA. It's not just go and see Vietnam as a tourist and then somehow feel Vietnamese. And actually, I would say being born a Vietnamese doesn't necessarily make you feel Vietnamese, as represented by even, my own family. So I do want to end by sharing a poem that was written by a famous poet, Nguyen Dynasty, written in 1971. So for those who don't like the current government regime, it was written way before them, by a Vietnamese who really love being Vietnamese. It's written in a very romantic and riveting way to describe how he feels about our history, our culture, our people, and really our experience as a race for thousands of years, because there were so many wars before the current, of what we're talking about. So it's in Vietnamese, so I'm just going to read it in Vietnamese, but we'll have a translation of it on the podcast later. Đất là nơi anh đến trường, nước là nơi em tắm, đất nước là nơi ta hò hẹn, đất nước là nơi em đánh rơi chiếc khăn trong nỗi nhớ thầm, đất là nơi con chim phượng hoàng bay về núi bạc, nước là nơi con cá ngư ong móng nước biển khơi, thời gian đằng đẵng, không gian mênh mông, đất nước là nơi dân mình đoàn tụ, đất là nơi chim về, nước là nơi rồng ở, Lạc Long Quân và Âu Cơ đẻ ra đồng bào ta trong bọc trứng, những ai đã khuất, những ai bây giờ yêu nhau và sinh con đẻ cái, gánh vác phần người đi trước để lại, dặn dò con cháu chuyện mai sau. Hàng năm ăn đâu nằm đâu, cũng biết cúi đầu nhớ ngày giỗ tổ. Trong anh em, trong anh và em hôm nay đều có một phần đất nước. Khi hai đứa cầm tay, đất nước trong chúng mình hài hòa nồng thắm. Khi chúng ta cầm tay mọi người, đất nước vẹn tròn to lớn. Mai này con ta lớn lên, con sẽ mang đất nước đi xa, đến những tháng ngày mơ mộng. Em ơi em, đất nước là máu xương của mình, phải biết gắn bó san sẻ, phải biết hóa thân cho dáng hình xứ sở, làm nên đất nước muôn đời.
Wow, what a beautiful poem.
Isn't that gorgeous?
It's so beautiful because it talks about the present moment. Well, when the author was living, and the future. He spoke at the end about bringing the beauty of the culture outside. I mean, it could be read many different ways, but the takeaway for me is not only is it beautiful now, but in future generations, this is a culture that should be spread around the world.
Yes, yes. I get emotional every time I read that poem because that's where it pains me to see the millions of overseas Vietnamese forfeiting their own culture. Forfeiting because it's been fading away. Forfeiting because of the bitterness that is deep in their hearts. Forfeiting because they had to change, they had to transition into something they're not.
Yeah, that is so accurate. And in many cases, the young children that were growing up in Ohio, Oklahoma, Mississippi, that were not growing up around Vietnamese communities, just sort of went into oblivion and just thought that they were white America. They thought that this was the way to go. And many of them, upon hitting colleges or leaving their hometowns, come to LA or Orange County or Houston, and they're like, what is going on? We had no idea that this was like a thing. We get that all the time. I run into kids in their 20s out here who are coming out to make it in LA as in the entertainment business, just blown away by the unity of the Vietnamese community in Southern California. It is a force to be reckoned with out here.
Absolutely. And then those who then go to Vietnam to even see that, 100-fold, right?
The
pride that's in the Vietnamese people today and the progress that they've made. Even those in Southern California and in DC, where I am, when we go back to Vietnam, we really see time hasn't stopped when we stopped coming,
exactly.
When we stopped learning about our own culture, And so when the very last thing I want to say is when we are in touch with our culture, when we really continue to live our culture, we become that much stronger, not just as individuals, but as a community and as a country, as a culture, just globally, as represented by this poem, that we are a mighty, a strong country heritage that it's the third oldest in the world, and we should really all be proud of that and elevate that, and know that, walk around with pride and just say that, look, I come from a culture that's 4,000 years old, and here I am, a product that is so much, stronger and better than, so many others.
Erin, thank you so much. I look forward to seeing you next week and celebrating in the festivities.
I do too, Ken. I can't thank you enough for coming, for just supporting us, for just even, being part of Vietnam Week. We will be out there as well in the coming weeks, in the coming months. And by the way, Nguyen Vic is coming back here. We're hosting him again to launch his new book, Man with Two Faces, at the end of October at the Martin Luther King Library. So please, everyone, come. But thank you again, Ken, for having me.
My pleasure. We'll see you soon, Erin.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to The Vietnamese with Kenneth Nguyen. Special thanks to Brittany Tran, to Jane Nguyen, Catherine Nguyen, Tina Pham, Sydney Jamie, and Christo Trin. Please find us on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok at The Vietnamese Podcast.